Good evening and welcome. We're so thrilled that you were able to join us tonight. My name is Renee Battle-Brooks, the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another Women in Faith Diverse Voices Speak event in partnership with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. Tonight, our panelists gather together to discuss finding hope in difficult times. We recognize that these are very difficult times. We are politically polarized. There's war. There's a looming threat of even greater, wide-ranging war. We are 2 years into a pandemic. We are exhausted and we are worn. But 2022 is more than that. We are more than that. From the Office of Human Rights, 2022 marks our 50th anniversary. And this year, we look back at Teresa Douglas Banks, a tireless Prince Georgian who advocated for the founding of our agency in 1972, who devoted her life to service. She was a teacher and administrator. She fought for wage parity for African American teachers. She ran for school board. She served on the first town council for the town of Glen Arden. She served her church. At the Office of Human Rights, we look to honor her life of service and her commitment to social justice and equity. It is our pleasure to continue that work tonight as we welcome 3 women in conversation about difficult times, about faith, and about hope. Our 4th panelist, who was here to represent our Muslim faith, Jena Luedtke, had an unforeseen emergency, and so we will not hear from her this evening. So the way the program will go tonight is we will bring each of our panelists up one at a time to really give a presentation. And then at the end of each of the 3 presentations, we will all come together and we will just have a conversation. So our first panelist, let me just grab a drink of water here. Thank you, is Inderpreet Kaur. Inderpreet joined the Sikh Coalition's team as the Southern California Development Manager in 2018. In February 2020, she transitioned into the role of Community Development Manager. In this role, she works to deepen Gurdwara and community engagement on a national scale through grassroots efforts. In addition, she directly provides support to community members and empowers them to promote interfaith solidarity, raise Sikh awareness, and defend civil rights. She was motivated to work at the Sikh Coalition by her passion to advocate for equal human rights and to ensure underrepresented communities have a voice. Since joining the Sikh Coalition, Inderpreet has created strong relationships with communities across California and other neighboring states. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Inderpreet has been heavily involved in the Southern California Sikh community for years by teaching at youth camps and co-founding a Khalsa food pantry, which now serves over 600 low-income families on a weekly basis. Prior to the Sikh Coalition, Inderpreet worked at St. Anne's, a social services organization where she helped young at-risk women transition their lives from the streets to safe housing. A lifelong advocate for gender equality, this area of work remains deeply important to her as she continues to raise awareness to issues of inequality and social justice. Inderpreet graduated from the University of California, Irvine, with a BA in sociology and political science and a minor in women's studies. Outside of work, she enjoys spending her time outdoors and learning new recipes. Before we hear from Inderpreet, we're going to introduce our other 2 distinguished panelists. Pastor Pernitha Falder. She has been part of the Sligo church community since 2001, and as a member, as a youth worker, as a coordinator for New Community Fellowship, as a youth leader, as a youth and young adult pastor, and now as the discipleship and congregational care pastor. She knows and loves the Sligo community. It was the Sligo community that encouraged and supported her call to ministry, making it her home. She was born in India and migrated to the US as a child. While a freshman at Tacoma Academy, Pranitha responded to God's call to give her life and talents in service to Him. Following Tacoma Academy, she attended Columbia Union College, now Washington Adventist University, acquiring her BA in theology, and subsequently attended and graduated from Andrews Theological Seminary in Michigan, where she earned a Master's of Divinity degree. Pastor Falder is married to Kaelan Falder, and they have a son, Azan, who is their greatest gift. So we welcome Pastor Pernitha Falder. Our final panelist you will hear from is Roya Bauman. She is a human resources and organizational development practitioner working at the National Center for Youth Law, headquartered in Oakland, California. I see a theme developing. Roya lives in Silver Spring, Maryland. She received her PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the George Washington University and her HR Human Resources credential from the Society for Human Resource Management. She is trained in the art of mediation. Roya's mother is an Iranian immigrant, and her father is of Eastern European background and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Her youth as an army brat gave her valuable experience with multiculturals and languages and a diversity of human beings. She is a lifelong follower of the Baha'i faith. Actually, she's fourth generation on her mother's side. In addition to having served as Baha'i representative to the board of the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington, Roya is a singer and choral director. She has released 2 CDs of Baha'i-oriented songs. She has training and experience with singing at the bedside of those who are ill or dying, which rank amongst her most profound spiritual moments. In her spare time, Roya loves serving the Baha'i faith, spending time with her daughters, exploring a wide range of teas and dark chocolate, practicing yoga, studying issues of racial justice, and actively working to eradicate prejudice from herself. So we are thrilled to have such 3 distinguished women on our panel. So thank you, Inderpreet, if you would start us off.
Thank you, Renee, for that introduction. And, equally as thrilled to be sharing the panel today with these awesome women. And I can't wait to learn more from them. And I hope I can share a little bit of my wisdom today as well. And, when the organizers had posed the question about hope and strength, I couldn't think of a better time to reflect on how far we've come and how much more there is left to this journey, right? Especially since we've been hearing terrible news from overseas, also, within the country as well. It's been a tough few years for all of us, and I'm grateful to be able to be here today to speak a little bit about what those few years looked like to me and what my faith really, how my faith really encouraged me to keep going and to look to my community for help. So I guess I'll start there. I do belong to the Sikh faith. So that's spelled S-I-K-H. And usually it's pronounced Sikhism. So when you, say it in English, it's Sikhism. But usually in Punjabi, which is my mother tongue, we call it Sikhi, or you call yourself a Sikh. I am a practicing Sikh. My mother and father are as well, and so is my husband. Sikh actually translates literally to student. So you're a student of life. And as you can tell, there's a lifelong journey of learning different things. And so I won't say that the views that I display today is, shared largely by the Sikh faith. I will say that everyone has their own perspective on things. And I'm personally here to share mine today. So I know that these past few years have been pretty tough. And, it really forced me to think that during the time of COVID, during the time of, you know, when we heard bad news coming in, how did I act upon these? And one thing that really stood out to me is, as a Sikh member of the community, we really tend to lean on not just our family and friends, but our larger community as well. And we call that Guru Panth, right? So that is basically saying, God's community, God's company. And we really do our best to make sure that anything we really do in life is included with our community, whether that's a birth in the family or a death in the family, whether it's a wedding or you're celebrating a newborn coming into your family, right? We do it with our whole community because that is another arm of our family. And so we really leaned towards our community to seek for healing and seek for help. We saw a lot of our community members, at least here in California, start to form online groups to pray together. We saw them form groups to have conversations about how they can help one another, how they can help their neighbors. And through that, we actually had developed a really awesome program called, I already run a food pantry down here in Los Angeles, California, called the Khalsa Food Pantry. And so this idea really sparked an encouragement for a lot of other community members throughout California as well. When I started speaking about the efforts that we were doing down here, we were serving about 70 families pre-COVID. And, shortly after we saw COVID shut down the state, shut down schools, shut down a lot of jobs as well. In March 2020, our food pantry decided that we would open it up to whoever needs food. We are a very small food pantry. We were a, one room, one classroom, operated company. It was nothing too fancy, very modest food pantry, but it really forced us to think, how are we going to help everyone who is being affected by this pandemic? And as we opened our doors, we saw lots of kids, lots of families coming in asking for food. And and this is something we never thought of. Schools were closed at this time. So kids were not receiving their lunches that they usually receive at school. They don't have the ticket system anymore. Kids were unable to go to their friends' homes to, make sure that they're keeping themselves safe. They were unable to visit families, and parents as well were not bringing in a paycheck as they usually do. And so we saw an influx of number. We saw 70 families. We saw our number of 70 families grow to 1,500 overnight. We had 1,500 families coming in looking for food, looking for resources, whether that's food insecurity, whether that's mental health, whether that is, of course, this is a year down the line, but vaccine resources as well. It really forced us to open up our doors and work as a community to see what we can do. That time itself, I will never forget looking at kids in, cars saying, "Thank you so much. This food really helps us," even if it's just rice and beans that we're giving out to them, right? It was nothing, we were not giving out awesome, crazy amount of foods during this time, especially because a lot of the food banks were slammed. But just seeing, kids happy with dry goods that we're giving them, that's able to put food on the table for at least the next 5 days, I will never forget that feeling in my life. So from then on, we kind of grew. We gave this idea to several other gurdwaras, which are houses of worship, Sikh houses of worship. We gave this idea to several other gurdwaras throughout California, and they started opening up small pop-up food pantries as well, just to make sure that they can help feed those around them. I've been so fortunate to be a part of this, this program, and making sure that we can expand it and help people in need. And that's where, I really saw the light at the end of the tunnel in March 2020, believe it or not, I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, that if we all can work together to help each other out during this tough period of time, we can make it out of this. We don't have to all go down. And so, that I always look at that as my pillar of strength for sure. And, we have this concept in Sikhism called Chardi Kala. Chardi Kala literally translates to eternal optimism. And it's a state of mind that, the supreme, God really tells us that this is something that we really need to be a part of, that whatever comes our way, whether it's, a time of grief, whether it is, a tough time in your life, it is very important to stay in the state of mind where you're going to make it through this. This is just a hump in the road. And now this is not, I'm not saying that, you're just supposed to accept everything that comes your way. It doesn't mean you can't have any ambitions or dream big or any of that, but rather, it gives you perspective in life that this is just one small part of life, but we will get through it. So that concept also really helped me through the pandemic, just remaining, calm about things that were coming my way, knowing that we're going to get through this together. And so I will say that that's where I really find my strength. Lately, that's where I've been finding my strength a lot, is looking back these past few years and really, knowing that we can all work as a community to get out of anything, to get out of any tough time, and lean towards one another. It's also very important to have these conversations within your community, letting them know that, hey, I'm actually not doing so well today. And it really sucks that we're stuck at home. We're not able to see our loved ones. We're missing holidays, we're missing birthdays. It just really sucks. And it's okay to feel that way. Oftentimes, we always sweep our sadness under the rug, and it's the happiness that we share with our loved ones, but it's important to share your sadness too. And that is something that I also learned through the concept of Chardi Kala, right? It's once you share your emotions, you share what you're going through one's life, it feels good to unburden yourself. And it feels good to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's what I have to say today, and that's what I have to share. And of course, I'm looking forward to sharing more as questions come near the end of the panel, but I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists as well. Thank you so much.
Renee, you're muted. Renee, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I've only been doing this for 2 years. I have to learn where the unmute button is. What I was saying is thank you so much for sharing those nuggets. So 2 nuggets I took from that was, as early as March 2020, you had this epiphany that we are going to make it through this, right? And the second thing is that it is okay and good to also share your sadness. So thank you. Thank you. All right. We will next hear from Pernitha, Pastor Pranitha Falder. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and to join the other panelists. And, so when I thought of the question, finding hope in difficult times, it was a deeply personal question to me. And I had to kind of just reflect on my life and just the times of difficulties that I faced. So I just want to share with you a little bit about my journey and where I have found hope in difficult times. So I was born in India and moved here as a child. And I just a little bit as I moved around a lot. I went to 7 elementary schools between India and America. I lived in 18 different places in a matter of 10 years. My family was an immigrant family. So even after we got to America, we moved around a lot. So there was, not as much stability and consistency. And because I moved around a lot, I lived with different family members at different points of my life. And so a sense of belonging was something that I didn't have as a child. And faith was not a big part of my childhood. When I was 14, faith became real to me. That's my son that you just saw in the background. Um, when I was 14, faith became real to me. I was attending a Christian school, high school, and God became real. I finally felt the sense of belonging in my life that I had never felt before. And I had this overpowering feeling that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, is to help other people feel this sense of belonging, the sense of coming home. So I was 14, an Indian girl that wanted to spend the rest of my life being a pastor. This did not go over well with my community. Unfortunately, with much of Indian community, the way women are viewed, it was just not something that was looked well upon. And I can tell you stories about things that just people I hadn't talked to in years would call me up as a young teenager saying, what do you think of yourself? Who do you think you are that you could be a pastor as a woman? There's just a lot of challenges there. And so I didn't know what to do about it. But then I found this community. And so when I think about how finding hope in difficult times, for me, it often comes down to the community I belong to. I found this community in Sligo Church. And in this place, I had never seen a female pastor before, but this church had 3 of them. And I gravitated towards this church, and it impressed me, you know, just to be able to see other women live out the call they felt God had put in their lives. And in our larger Adventist church, there wasn't, and even now there's not great parts of our church that are supportive of this, but there was this community. I was 17 when I started working at Sligo Church. They were paying me for ministry. They trained me. They gave me space to be creative. They gave me space to explore my call. So when I think about what gave me hope in difficult times, it was community. This community that allowed me to live out this call, to explore it, to make mistakes. And I'm still working there 20 years later, because it has become this place that really helps. You know, we have a saying at Sligo that says all are gifted, all are valued. And it is something that we believe and something that we live by. And that has deeply impressed me and has helped me in these difficult times. And there have been many times, my husband is African American. That did not go over well when I decided to, as an Indian, to marry an African American. And there was a lot of difficulty there with my community for all kinds of reasons. And again, there was a community that supported us through that and supported our relationship. You know, and I think in all of this, the thread, all are gifted, all are valued, is something that my faith has taught me, in the context of where I experienced my faith. I liked what Inderpreet said, that, you know, while we have these big global faiths, everyone has a different perspective and a different way they live out their faith. The community where I was able to live out my faith, this idea of all are gifted, all are valued, you know, it shouldn't matter if my husband is African American or Indian or whatever he is, he's valuable. And so that idea, I think, helps me through difficult times, and it has helped shape how I try to live my life. Justice is, you know, oftentimes when we read scripture, the Bible in this case, people often think it's a lot about personal piety, but a close reading of scripture is really this idea that God has preserved a part of his image in every human being, and we have to honor that. And the times that you see God get most upset throughout the biblical story is when people don't treat other people right. And the word for justice and righteousness, we often focus on the righteousness of like religious personal piety, but the word is actually justice, right doing, not just between us and God, but right doing, righteousness between us and other human beings. And the story of the Bible is that God became human, right? To dwell amongst us, to share in the human experience. And I think community is not just about what we can teach other people or, you know, what we teach them about our faith, but it's how do we be human together? My humanness with your humanness, and there has to be justice in that. There has to be justice in how we treat each other, because if God created you, God created me, then we have to be able to recognize the image of God in one another. And so for me, in difficult times, that's what guides me. The community that I believe that we are supposed to be living in, whatever faith we're part of. And for me, I was blessed enough to find a faith that nurtured my call. And that idea that all are gifted and all are valued, and so we have to seek justice for everyone. It doesn't matter whether we live the same, look the same, believe the same. It doesn't matter if we're from the same place. I have to recognize the God in you. And so that helps me in times of difficulty, because it helps me kind of be able to look past the aisle. It helps me to create community and foster community with those that are different, and so that we can work towards one common goal. And my worldview is shaped by that. And you know, on another just kind of a spiritual discipline level, what helps me in difficult times is things like practicing gratitude, practicing just being present. You saw my 4-year-old son run by. I have a gratitude journal for him that we do every night, just so that he can practice gratitude, and just being still, you know, and kind of being in the thick of it and not running away from the ugliness that we see, but participating in it. And for me, that's one of the most important things I see in the life of Jesus, that he got in the dirty and the ugly and he became a part of it. And I think that's what guides my faith, that is what I need to do, to be in the mix of it with people, in the human experience. And those things give me hope. It gives me hope to be able to recognize that community and to be part of a community, and then to also work towards justice, that we should not and don't need to accept things the way they are. You know, whatever faith background, there's kind of always this future eternity that we're talking about, where all things are supposed to be perfect. But what my faith has taught me is I don't need to wait for some far off future thing to happen, that I have to do it right here. I have to make the world a place that is reflective of the image of God here and now. And so that has helped me in difficult times. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. But thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, thank you, Pernitha. That was great. So the nuggets I picked up from you is that justice reflects the image of God, right? And that that we have to recognize the God in each other when we are truly living out what it is. All are gifted, all are valued. Thank you so much. So we will have you back for the final discussion. And now we're going to hear from Roya. So we welcome Roya. Thank you so much.
Hi there, everybody. Sorry, I was muted there for a moment. Thank you so much for including me in this lovely conversation. It's been wonderful to hear from the two amazing women who just preceded me, and how they are bringing their own faith and service to bear in their role in humanity. So I wanted to just share some thoughts from a perspective of a Baha'i. I'm a follower of the Baha'i faith. Just so you know, the Baha'i faith has no clergy. So I'm not a clergy person or anything like that. I'm just a person who practices the Baha'i faith and likes to talk about it. So what I'd like to do is to kind of broaden our conversation slightly when we're talking about the how to find hope in difficult times, is to put this current moment in the context, I was going to say in the context of eternity, which is a little broad, but I'd like to say that in the context of the spiritual maturation process of the entire human race. So when we think about the process that humanity is going through, humanity is going through many tests and trials and difficulties. We know that. We're in the midst of simultaneous challenges and amazing transformations. Individuals within society are in the midst of challenges and difficulties, tribulations, but also transformations. These are cycles within cycles, I guess you could say. So these transitions and these difficulties are nothing new. This is what characterizes human life on this planet at both the individual level, the community level, and the global level. It's always been this way. It will always be this way. But let me just say first and foremost that humanity is heading towards a goal. It's a simple goal to say out loud, a little more challenging in implementation, but I'm just going to put it out there for you to reflect on as I talk about some other things. And this goal is the realization of the inherent oneness of humanity. The inherent oneness of humanity. So just, percolate on that a little bit as I talk about this moment that we find ourselves in. I would say that we're undergoing, as a humanity, we're undergoing concurrent forces of both integration and disintegration. So from the beginning of humankind through today and on into the future, God or the Great Spirit, Allah, or whatever term you use to call the entity that's created all things, has been gradually trying to guide human beings towards certain principles. Among them are unity, love, justice, equality. These are principles that are at the core of every religious faith. And so, as Baha'is believed, and our founder and prophet Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God, has taught us, every one of the world's great religions stem from the same source and are therefore one in essence and are revealed progressively over time in accordance with the needs of humanity at that time in our spiritual maturation process. So Jesus brought us teachings, for example, to help with creating unity and love within the human family. Muhammad brought us principles that help us learn to live in harmony and unity with others in, let's say, within a nation state. Now, we have graduated, if you will, to quite an extensive awareness of our global society. And as humanity has matured, as civilizations have developed, a broader and broader perspective has become visible to people. So it's like a very exciting time in the development of humanity because we have this perspective that previous generations, centuries, and peoples have not been able to have, to view our planet as one interdependent homeland. So Kyla, if you don't mind putting up that one slide, I'm going to read it for us. This is written by the international governing body of the Baha'i Faith, the Universal House of Justice. In the revolutionary changes taking place in every sphere of life is the interaction of two fundamental processes. One is destructive in nature, while the other is integrative. Both serve to carry humanity, each in its own way, along the path leading towards its full maturity. The operation of the former, the destructive, is everywhere apparent in the vicissitudes that have afflicted time-honored institutions, in the impotence of leaders at all levels to mend the fractures appearing in the structure of society, in the dismantling of social norms that have long held in check unseemly passions, and in the despondency and indifference exhibited not only by individuals, but also by entire societies that have lost any vital sense of purpose. Though devastating in their effects, the forces of disintegration tend to sweep away barriers that block humanity's progress, opening space for the process of integration to draw diverse groups together and disclosing new opportunities for cooperation and collaboration. Thank you. You can take the slide down. So one thing as a Baha'i, I would say that helps give me hope is recognizing this moment in time of an eons long process that we're part of. And that these forces of disintegration that surround us that can be so distressing are natural. They must be swept away in order to be supplanted by the forces of integration, of society, of peoples, of institutions that must take their place. So that's one source as a Baha'i of hope, is understanding our time in this moment. I think some of the tests that humanity has recently been going through, such as COVID, I found when COVID first hit, sometimes I'm on Twitter too long, so too much, I should say. But I noticed people were asking each other, what are you learning from this experience? And I noticed, to my absolute delight, that more and more people were recognizing our inherent oneness as a human family. That when a force happens and affects one part of the world, it inevitably comes to affect other parts of the world. And so I was so happy to see more and more people becoming awake to that notion. And if you look at all of the forces that we're surrounding, climate, communications, our physical world, our currencies, our resources across the globe, all of them, if you look at them carefully, demonstrate our interdependence. So I think as Baha'is, we are constantly oriented towards bringing awareness of how God designed us, which is we are inherently one human family. That all religions are revealed from the same one source, that in this country in particular, a lot of us call God, others call Great Spirit. That entity is one entity, and therefore all the religions of the world are also inherently one, like chapters of one book. So Baha'is are always trying to bring awareness of these concepts, because I think they just naturally help people to have hope that unity is indeed possible. Justice, for example, is indeed possible. The disintegration of these societal institutions that are founded upon injustice and racism and prejudice, they have to be swept away. Otherwise, we're not going to progress. So to me, those are all, forms of hope. They give me hope. There's another way, we're basically spiritual beings having a physical experience. So as individual spiritual beings, Baha'is pray to God. Prayer is very important because we wish to take our spirit that God has gifted to us, that is also connected to God, and we want to strengthen that connection. So there's a Baha'i prayer. There's one sentence in there. This is one of my favorite Baha'i prayers, because when I'm having a really bad day, I'll say this prayer. So this is an excerpt. In the darksome night of despair, my eye turneth expectant and full of hope to the morn of thy boundless favor. And at the hour of dawn, my drooping soul is refreshed and strengthened in remembrance of thy beauty and perfection. So this is the individual speaking to God, recognizing God's attributes. And as other religions also reflect, human beings are meant to reflect the attributes of God. That's what being created in the image of God means. It means to reflect God's attributes, beauty and kindness and justice, and so many. There are thousands, if you will. If you think about it, like individuals are like, the soul is like a a mirror that reflects the light of God. And think about a mirror that is tarnished or dirty or has mud on it. Those are like prejudices and hatred and greed. Those are the things that dirty our mirror and make it less able to reflect the light of God in all its strength and purity. So it's our job throughout our lives to constantly be polishing the mirror of our souls so that over time we're better and better able to reflect the attributes of God. So that's another thing that kind of gives me hope. And that is that as individuals, if we are working every day to perfect our souls, to make them more like God intended them to be, to better reflect the attributes of God, and we will always have work to do. But if we're constantly focusing on those things, we will always improve. If we help others around us to do the same, they will improve. If we speak about unity and the need for justice and the inherent oneness of humanity, they will start to permeate people's thought patterns. And then perhaps more people will speak about those things and reflect on them and try to enact them in their daily lives. So at the risk of going on forever, because I could talk about this for certainly a very, very long time, I wanted to just share two quotes with you from the Baha'i writings. One has to do with the purpose of tests and difficulties. So we don't get overly, distracted or discouraged by tests. This excerpt from the Baha'i writing says, "Those who suffer most attain to the greatest perfection. Men or humans who suffer not attain no perfection. The plant most pruned by gardeners is that one which, when the summer comes, will have the most beautiful blossoms and the most abundant fruit." And the last thing I'd like to share with you, if I can find it very quickly here. I wanted to upload it, but it didn't work. Okay, this is from the prophet and founder of the Baha'i faith. "It is incumbent upon every man of insight and understanding to strive to translate that which is written into reality and action. That one indeed is a man who today dedicateth himself to the service of the entire human race. The great being saith, Blessed and happy is he that ariseth to promote the best interests of the peoples and kindreds of the earth. In another passage he hath proclaimed, It is not for him to pride himself who loveth his own country, but rather for him who loveth the whole world. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." That's from Baha'u'llah. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts. And I'm looking forward to the panel conversation.
And thank you so much, Roya. There were lots of nuggets. The one that to me was the most beautiful really is the soul is like the mirror that reflects the light of God. Beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you. So Kyla, if we could have all of our panelists together now on one screen. This was beautiful, ladies, beautiful. So in listening, you know, there's themes that I heard reflected in each of your presentations. And each of you spoke, if not directly, but really you did speak about hope and where you find hope and where hope came from in your personal journey. And I wonder for those listening, you know, hopelessness, this is just my opinion, I think drives a lot of the not so nice things that we see, whether it's hurting others, whether, you know, some of the things that make the news, I think, is driven by this sense of hopelessness. And so really it's one question, but one, you've spoken about where your hope comes from, but where does hope come from And then more importantly, how do we instill hope in children? Like, what does that look like? Is that important? I suspect it is very. And why? So sort of multiple questions. You can answer all or part, and please just anyone jump in.
I want to speak. The question you said, how do you instill hope in children? So this was something that we actually were trying to instill in our son, because just in COVID, being just home, he's 4, he was 3 when it started, or maybe actually 2 when it started. And he is someone who needs to be in community and who needs to be with other people. And so being stuck at home was really hard, as it was for many children. And so we kind of started seeing just maybe a little bit of, I don't want to say pessimism, but kind of, just the sadness. And so that's, you heard me mention this gratitude journal. I just got off a kid's gratitude journal on Amazon. And that just like, it helps him, I think, with hope, because it makes him a little bit more optimistic. Every week he works on one thing. It's, what's the most beautiful sound you heard today? Or what is a friend you thought about today? And I think optimism helps with hope, in instilling hope in children. So just that part, because that's specifically something that we were working with our son.
That's wonderful. Inderpreet, what do you think? Where does hope come from? Is it important? Why is this, how do we give people hope in hopeless acts, things that are occurring?
Yeah, I think, Renee, I think I'll go back to what Pranitha said, in the beginning, is that teaching kids hope is it's a huge deal, especially the kids that have been growing up during COVID, have been growing up through the pandemic. I can't imagine how tough that is. But one thing that's really helped, I do work with quite a few youth groups. So I know one thing that does help is making sure that these kids have some sort of community groups to go to. Especially post-COVID or post-almost COVID is over. We never know where we really stand, right, these days. But just making sure that kids have a support group, especially, teenagers too, right? I know we're talking about young kids here, but we saw a huge toll that was taken on teenagers. Just within our Sikh community here in SoCal, a lot of parents were reaching out to me to see where they can seek mental health resources. And one thing that I've seen is that, when kids have other kids their age to talk about the issues that they're going through, or maybe even someone, that's a professional, and they're able to talk to somebody, it really helps them. So that's one thing. And then, in terms of just general how to pass hope down to other people, I do think that comes through your own actions, what you do for the community. So as much as you can give back to the community, as much as you can help another person and lend a hand, whether it's, whether it's just, delivering their groceries for them because they're unable to go to the grocery store, or whether that's just giving them a phone call and lending your ear for 5-10 minutes. I think through actions actions speak louder than words, right? So spend as much time for other people as possible, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. So we build hope by helping others, by focusing away from us. And yeah, that's great. Roya, what do you think?
Thanks for asking, Renee. I would say there's another writing in the Baha'i faith that says, spiritual souls, tender souls, the hearts of all children are of the utmost purity. They are mirrors upon which no dust has fallen. So going back to that concept as the soul as a mirror. So, children are born pure, and only as they are exposed to us adults and the things of the world, do they start to build, some of the negative aspects maybe of tradition and prejudice and all of these things. But they're not born with those things. So to Baha'is, education is supremely important, but not just, material education, also spiritual education. So at different stages of the child's development, whatever is most, in a way that is cognizant of the stage of development they're in. We want to help them understand their inherent nobility and the inherent nobility of every other person that they come in contact with. And then also to recognize, constantly kind of drilling into them these notions of oneness, of doing away with prejudice, of building unity, of seeing people of all skin tones, cultures, ethnicities, and languages, and cultural backgrounds as just beautiful human beings. So that's kind of a super global answer, but I think what I'm talking about is spiritual education that helps a child learn to be grounded in some of those concepts. At the same time, service is tremendously important. So we have to turn words into action, prayers into action. So we want to raise our children to be of service to humanity. When my older daughter was getting ready to go to college, I didn't have a lot to say about what major she picked, but the one thing I did to say to her, the one guidance I wanted to share was, whatever you do choose, try to be of service to humanity in whatever it is. And that's the one thing I wanted her to internalize. Research has demonstrated that being of service actually releases those positive brain chemicals. So even in the midst of a really crappy day or a terrible pandemic, if you can find ways to be of service to others in your household, to other family members, to neighbors, even if it's like just taking flowers to their doorstep, or calling someone and saying a prayer together over the phone, or as many people do over Zoom, you're praying together, you're sharing spiritual concepts. Those are all ways to help pull people out of that sense of loss and dread they might be feeling.
Yeah, I love how through each of your faith lenses that really everyone's saying the same thing, this of not, dwelling or, looking within, but really focusing on external or putting those thoughts into action. So Dan Hamlin has a practical question that's really the sub part, like, how does your faith community embrace those who feel hopelessness? So really this is sort of the action now, the carrying out of the nice words. So that's a great question. Thank you, Daniel. So let's see, let's start with Pranitha.
There's a book called Don't Sing Songs to a Heavy Heart. And in my role, what I do is I'm around a lot of our members who are experiencing loss, death, all kinds of loss. And I think in dealing with people who are hopeless, there's different levels of that. There's temporary hopelessness. There is people who are feeling extended levels of hopelessness where they might need therapy or other kinds of mental health resources because there's extended periods of hopelessness that's caused by other things. But I think on a daily level, what my church does, I think what's important to do is to create spaces where people can feel hopeless, because there's reasons for that. So this idea of don't sing songs to a heavy heart is to create safe space for hopelessness. And once the person feels heard and they feel safe and they're able to share their story, then I think we can do these external services, because part of faith is not just trying to make everything better, but it's to create space where humans can be humans. And part of the human experience is the hopelessness, is the sadness, is the grief. It's not just to say let's make it better. So I think one of the ways we embrace it is by creating safe space to feel that hopelessness.
Thank you, Pranitha. Inderpreet.
Yeah, and I feel like Pranitha and I are on the same wavelength here, because that's exactly what I was thinking as well. But I will speak that as a Sikh, it's very difficult for us to find safe spaces to discuss things that cause grief or cause hopelessness, and a lot of that comes from our cultural side as well, where in the Punjabi culture, it's very it's very difficult to be open with your emotions. You're supposed to be the strong person all the time, especially if you're men, right? Or if you identify as a male. So it's very, very hard for us to find these safe spaces. And, thankfully the youth now, they're really taking charge and trying to change this in their community. So, I know quite a few youth-led organizations that are making sure that anyone that is feeling hopelessness, whether that's, during a time of grief or there's, family matters going on in the home, there is a space, whether that's at the house of worship or whether that's somebody's home, a community member's home, or, the organization's office. There is a safe space where someone can come and, help with those. But yeah, that's something that we're really trying to enforce in our houses of worship. And, way back when, I'm sure historically, these spaces were available because gurdwaras are supposed to be community centers for our community. Our houses of worship act as community centers, as they do in many other faiths as well. And so, we've kind of backtracked a little bit, and now we're trying to find that common ground again with our older generation, and convince them that, hey, we're not strong all the time, and that's okay. And we do need to find a community space where people could come together and speak with one another and show up for each other.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Inderpreet. Roya.
I would agree with everything that was just said. There's a tendency sometimes for people of faith to commit what people sometimes call spiritual bypassing, which is, or it's like if someone's in need or in distress or having trouble or even doubting the existence of God, you tend to throw at them like, just pray, or give them lots of spiritual teachings. It's like, just reflect on these teachings and it'll all be better. But I think, there's a role for that, but there's also a role for getting help and for being real and authentic. And as Inderpreet was saying, my mom is from Persian Iranian culture, very similar, very difficult to talk about emotions, about difficulties, acknowledging that you need help, all of that stuff. So I find that each generation tends to dilute the trauma of the generation before, if they're not re-traumatized, of course. And that each generation, so my kids' age, they're 20 and 23, their generation has a much better grasp on authenticity, on justice, and on, equity than previous generations. And right, exactly as Dan is saying, we're not strong all the time, and that's okay. And it has to be okay because we are human beings. So, that's all I'll say about that.
No, thank you. Thank you. There's so much we could talk about, sort of how does culture bear, we touched a little bit on it, but unfortunately we are out of time. I really, really want to thank and appreciate the three of you for coming, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your faith, for giving us words of encouragement and things to really think about as, we are all living this life together. We're all on this journey together, even if some don't acknowledge, right? But we are all in this together. And we want to thank all of you for tuning in, for listening. Hopefully there's something that you heard that gives you that one thing that you needed to hear, and we want you to share. So we are grateful for the time and dedication that was given to this. So I think the theme is, you are not alone. And the words of our three wonderful panelists remind us of the power of community. We are not alone. I want to take a moment just to let you know of some other great events that we have coming up in partnership with our library system. So next week on Monday, we host the award-winning poet Jacqueline Trimble on her upcoming collection on how to survive the apocalypse. So she has been a guest before. She's wonderful. 7 to 8 o'clock. It's always 7 to 8 in the evening. On Tuesday, we have our Prince George's County Reads. We continue looking at chapter 6 of Dr. William Thomas's amazing book, A Question of Freedom, The Families Who Challenged Slavery from the Nation's Founding to the Civil War. And for those who don't know, this examines the freedom suits brought by enslaved Prince Georgians. It's very personal to this county. And really, it's a legacy to how Georgetown University started. So our county reads, please join us Tuesday. And last but not least, on Wednesday, next week, we are thrilled to welcome Prince George's County Chief Health Officer, Dr. Ernest Carter. He's amazing. He's helped us through this entire COVID. We're not done yet, but he's helped us through this entire COVID journey. And we're going to talk about a series that we started called Does Your Zip Code Impact Your Whole Life? And so we're going to do a deep dive into the impact of where you live and how it affects your health. So Dr. Carter is one of our panelists next Wednesday. So please join us. To learn more about all of our events, the Office of Human Rights, we partner with a lot of people and we have a lot of events, as you can see, again, this 3 next week. Please just Google Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. Check out our webpage. You can find us there. You can also go to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System because we are co-partners with a lot of the same events. We want to thank everyone again for joining us, and we wish everyone good health and safety, and as always, hope. So remember, we're all in this together. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.